Imagine the global economy as a highly complex, slightly overwrought suspension system. In 2025, that system was stress tested by the most significant U.S. tariff hikes in recent history.
They do it to us and we do it to them. China, 67%.
The world braced for a crash, but instead, we experienced a surprisingly soft landing. Supply chains simply adapted. Like water finding a crack, global trade intelligently routed through the ASEAN region, completely reshaping the board. But economic resilience is rarely just about dodging a punch, it is also about forward momentum. In this case, that momentum came from a massive surge in artificial intelligence capital expenditure, which acted as a powerful tailwind for global growth. But resilience has its limits. In late February 2026, a black swan event landed in the Middle East, leading to the unprecedented closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Almost overnight, the global economy lost 13% of its normal crude oil supply. To put that in perspective, abruptly taking 13% of global oil offline is like randomly unplugging one in every 8 power cords in a massive data center. The system is going to overheat rapidly, and the chokehold went far beyond oil. Critical supplies of natural gas, fertilizers, and helium, an indispensable cooling agent for semiconductor manufacturing, were heavily disrupted. Asia, a region deeply reliant on these specific imports, absorbed the hardest structural blow, facing an immediate and severe risk of stagflation. This sudden energy shock immediately squeezed household disposable incomes, slamming the brakes on consumer spending, particularly across Europe. But here is where the plot twists. When inflation surged back in 2022, the labor market was booming, which forced central banks into aggressive interest rate hikes to cool things down. Today, the labor market is notably cooler. Experiencing inflation without wage growth is like being asked to pay for a premium subscription while your salary is permanently stuck on the free tier. Recognizing this fundamental fragility, major central banks have opted for restraint. Rather than aggressively hiking rates and crushing what is left of our economic growth, they are holding steady, patiently allowing the system to absorb the shock. Right now, the world's largest technology giants are engaged in a historic spending spree. They are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into semiconductors, data centers, and power infrastructure to build the physical foundation of artificial intelligence. In terms of raw economic momentum, this capital expenditure supercycle is acting as a powerful growth engine, successfully offsetting weakness in more traditional sectors. To put a number on it, estimates indicate that AI capital expenditures will provide a staggering 140 basis point boost to the economic growth of the United States in 2026, and a 150 basis point boost in 2027. It is a scale of business investment reminiscent of the late 1990s tech boom. But this specific engine has a highly unusual design. It runs almost entirely on capital and uses very little human labor. Building a billion-dollar data center is a heavy asset endeavor, but once it is plugged in, it requires remarkably few people to operate. For comparison, a $1.5 billion data center might support a mere 100 long-term jobs, whereas a similarly priced traditional manufacturing plant would employ over 1,600 people. By absorbing massive amounts of global funding to buy servers and microchips, the AI sector is inadvertently pushing up the overall cost of capital. It is effectively sucking the financial oxygen out of the room, creating a risk that traditional, labor-intensive sectors, like residential real estate, could be starved of the funding they desperately need. And then there is the reality of the physical world. The boundless ambition of AI is currently colliding with hard physical supply walls. The exponential demand for compute has triggered an overwhelming thirst for electricity, pushing power grids to their absolute limits and creating acute price pressures. Simultaneously, the physical hardware supply chain is choking. Essential components required to build these AI factories, such as advanced memory chips, are so fiercely contested that leading manufacturers are entirely sold out of capacity until 2027. You can have all the capital in the world, but if there is no power on the grid and no memory chips on the shelf, the machine cannot grow. Financial history has a very distinct rhythm. Whenever a profound technological breakthrough arrives, capital floods the market far beyond what immediate commercial returns can justify. We saw this with the canal mania of the 1830s, the railway expansion of the 1840s, and the internet boom of the late 1990s. Today, the artificial intelligence investment race looks remarkably similar. Why does this happen so reliably? Bubbles form precisely when the path to profitability is highly uncertain. When investors cannot clearly understand how a new technology will generate profits, compelling stories of future wealth easily take over. Human beings use narratives to make sense of the unknown, and in the absence of clear business models, these stories become the sole foundation of market valuations. If a story is convincing enough, investors will gladly fund an imagined future rather than present reality. In the current technology ecosystem, this dynamic has birthed a complex web of circular financing. Major cloud providers take equity stakes in artificial intelligence startups, and those same startups use the investment funds to purchase computing power back from the exact same providers. It is a self-reinforcing loop that inflates revenue numbers and makes the entire system deeply interconnected. If the expected returns fail to materialize, a sudden pullback in financing could trigger a wave of credit defaults, amplifying broad financial instability. However, the market is beginning to wake up from the pure hype. The focus is shifting rapidly from theoretical potential to actual execution and cash flow visibility. Investors are increasingly favoring companies with tangible immediate profits, such as semiconductor manufacturers, supplying the essential hardware of this digital gold rush. Conversely, software companies are facing much greater scrutiny as they confront higher risks of disruption and highly uncertain paths to monetizing their new tools. The era of blindly funding a good story is closing, and the era of demanding a solid balance sheet has begun. To build the digital mind, one must first master the physical world. The global hardware supply chain for artificial intelligence is incredibly complex, yet it remains astonishingly fragile. Consider the fabrication of semiconductors, which requires massive amounts of helium as an essential cooling and cleaning agent. A significant portion of this helium originates from natural gas fields in the state of Qatar, relying on passage through the Strait of Hormuz. When the Strait of Hormuz experienced an unprecedented closure, it immediately threatened the critical inputs required by chip manufacturers across Asia. This raw material bottleneck points to an even greater vulnerability located in Taiwan. Currently, a single enterprise known as TSMC fabricates almost every leading artificial intelligence chip on the planet. To understand the risk, imagine balancing the entire technological future of the global economy on a single glass marble. Both Taiwan and South Korea, which host the most critical semiconductor fabrication capacity of the world, are highly exposed to energy and supply shocks. Any regional conflict or sustained disruption would be catastrophic, as the rest of the world lacks the immediate capacity to replicate this specific manufacturing precision. Recognizing this extreme structural risk, governments are fundamentally shifting their strategies. They are no longer simply writing regulations. They are actively pursuing artificial intelligence sovereignty. Sovereignty represents a deliberate policy to gain independent control over domestic computing capabilities and reduce dependence on foreign technology providers. To achieve this independence, nations are deploying state funds to build their own supercomputing clusters and advanced data centers. Between the year 2018 and the year 2025, Europe and Central Asia expanded their state-backed computing clusters from 3 to 44. North America also multiplied its public cluster count over the same period. The message is clear. In the 21st century, relying entirely on the commercial models and infrastructure of another nation is considered a profound national security vulnerability. Computing power has become the foundation of geopolitical strength. Artificial intelligence is undeniably a cognitive lever. At the task level, AI can drastically improve productivity, routinely saving workers between 20 and 50% of their time. It is the equivalent of giving every knowledge worker a highly competent, tireless intern who never needs to sleep. But here lies a profound macroeconomic paradox. If the automation of these tasks leads to widespread job displacement without creating new opportunities, the global consumer base will fundamentally shrink. Every displaced worker is also a lost consumer. Producing goods efficiently becomes entirely meaningless if purchasing power vanishes, creating a severe demand bottleneck that can ultimately stall the very economic growth the technology was supposed to unleash. We are already seeing the first tremors of this shift in the labor market, and the impact is highly concentrated. It is not the seasoned veterans taking the hit, it is the entry-level talent. For instance, employment for software developers aged 22 to 25 has plummeted by nearly 20% compared to the previous year. AI is effectively substituting for junior labor, quietly cutting off the traditional pipeline of corporate apprenticeship and skill development. So, where is the massive economy-wide productivity boom we were promised? To realize the true economic potential of artificial intelligence, we have to recognize that simply using a machine to speed up an existing task is not enough. Merely swapping a human for an algorithm in an outdated process is like dropping an electric motor into a horse-drawn carriage. Point solutions only get you so far before they hit structural limits. To see real gains, organizations must adopt a system mindset, entirely redesigning their workflows, training, and operational structures from the ground up. Because this level of systemic corporate restructuring is painful and takes significant time, macroeconomic productivity statistics will experience a delay. Economists call this the J-curve effect. Economic output and productivity might look flat or even dip as companies absorb the massive upfront costs of adoption before the true transformational benefits of AI finally take off. The promise of artificial intelligence is the promise of infinite cognitive leverage. It is the profound belief that software can finally decouple human intelligence from biology. But as we have seen, the digital mind remains entirely tethered to the physical world. You cannot compute without copper, and you cannot train models without gigawatts of electricity. Furthermore, you cannot build the necessary hardware without navigating the most contested geopolitical chokepoints on the planet, from the Strait of Hormuz to the advanced semiconductor factories of Taiwan. The artificial intelligence capital expenditure supercycle is not just a software revolution, it is a massive industrial buildout in disguise. We are currently witnessing a historic collision between the limitless imagination of financial narratives and the hard, unforgiving boundaries of physical infrastructure. As the initial hype cycle inevitably cools, the corporations and nations that will truly define the next era will not be those with the most compelling stories. They will be the entities that can secure the raw materials, rebuild their organizational systems from the ground up, and patiently navigate the messy, complex reality of the global economy. In the end, technology does not operate in a vacuum. It is shaped by energy, human labor, capital, and the unpredictable rhythms of history. The future is not a destination we are passively drifting toward. It is a resilient system we must carefully and deliberately build.